and everybody who does the meeting. And I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I will tell you that, and welcome Regina and Whitney. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope you stay with us. Life is an adventure, and I thought life would be dull and boring and over, and I'd never have fun. And how do I dance or cook or do anything without drinking? And what I've learned is I can do all of that now. And I was able to even in my early sobriety. So I was given the gift of sobriety on May 1st, 1988 in Fort Worth, Texas, and it was at the Glass House Group, which is a church annex. And they called it the Glass House because we're supposed to live as if we live in a glass house. My insides and outsides need to match. They told me a loving higher power that I had to find and did find through Alcoholics Anonymous. They said a loving higher power that I could call God if I want to expresses itself through me, and are my words, actions, and deeds reflecting that loving higher power? That maybe I'm the only program of Alcoholics Anonymous that somebody may see. And our Alcoholics Anonymous book has a line in one of the stories, and it says, the world was judging me by my actions, and I'm judging me by my intentions. And before I got to you, it was always about my intentions, but now my actions and my intentions need to match because I want to stay sober. So a day at a time, I have not had a drink since May 1st, 1988. And that is 37 years, 5 months, and 3 days. And that is 13,670 days. And what I like to remember is it's 1,952 weeks. And the reason I like the weeks more than the days is because, I would white knuckle it. And I started drinking at 18. I got sober at 37 and a half. Last Friday, I was 75 years young. I am sober half of my life. I am sober 37 and a half years, and I had 37 and a half years of life as I lived it. And my best thinking got me to Alcoholics Anonymous in the state it was in. And I knew I had a problem in my early 20s. Somebody planted the Alcoholics Anonymous seed in my brain, and I wasn't like that person. And I said, I'm not like you. I didn't drink every day, all day. I didn't go to jail. I didn't get a DUI. I did have blackouts, but I never woke up in a different state on a week later, And so I kept looking for the differences until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I could go 2 weeks. I could white knuckle, not drink for 2 weeks, and then I would always drink again. But once I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had a drink since I came to you. I came here and I felt shame and guilt and remorse and terror and fear and anxiety and depression, all those things. And so I come to Alcoholics Anonymous because I knew I had a problem. It was getting really bad. I still never went to jail or got a DUI or any of those things. And I don't want to go back and drink because they told me it's a progressive disease. And if I ever pick up, it's as if I never stopped. And I've listened to enough people to know that is true. And I might not make it back. So when I came to you, that's how I felt. I did embarrassing things when I drank, and I changed what I drank, and I drank for effect and all the things the big book said, And when I was did a lot of controlled drinking because I was about 19 and I went out with this guy and he got throwing up sick drunk, and I said, I'll never do that. And so I tried to do controlled drinking so I wouldn't do that, but I will tell you I did that many times. I put myself in very bad situations sometimes. I never set out and said, gee, I'm going to go drink tonight, and I think I'll go home in a blackout, or I think I'll go home with somebody I just met tonight. But I did all those embarrassing things. So that's kind of how I felt when I got to you. So I get into Alcoholics Anonymous because somebody I work with is a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and Al-Anon. And I got to you through kind of a trick from this higher power that I thought was hateful and punishing because I had a boyfriend that showed up in a blackout. And I told my friend at work about his drinking, and she suggested that I go to a meeting of Al-Anon. And so she told me about the Glass House. Well, you know what happened? My first meeting, Glass House, when they had a speaker, they did not have an Al-Anon meeting. And I sat in the back of the room at that open Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. And I listened to the AA speaker. And I went, yeah, I did that. Yeah, that happened to me. Yeah, I felt like that. Yeah, me too. And identified. And my first 3 meetings were open AA meetings. In every meeting, they would say, does anybody have a desire to stop drinking and try this way of life for 24 hours? They didn't say the rest of my life. They said 24 hours. And so after a few meetings, I took that long walk from the back of the room up to the front, and I got what they called a desire chip. It's a little silver coin. And the person that gave it to me said, Carol, if you ever want to drink, you put this under your tongue, and if it melts, you can drink, and if it doesn't, you can't. And I will tell you, there are many times I put it under my tongue. I think it probably had teeth marks in it, but it never melted, and I never drank to this day. But what happened to me is, alcohol was my solution. It let me talk to people. It let me dance. It let me have fun at, weddings or parties or whatever. And it also caused me to do embarrassing things. And it was a lot of work to make sure. They told me when I got sober to put as much effort into my sobriety as I did into my drinking. It was a lot of effort to drink. If I'm out at a bar and I had to go to the ladies' room, I had to make sure my shirt was tucked in and, I didn't stagger and hit walls and, all that stuff. And at the end of my drinking, I wasn't at bars anymore. I drank at home. It was cheaper and I didn't have to worry about driving drunk and killing somebody. Because somebody I worked with, her son and another kid, one was 18, one was 19, they drove drunk, had an accident, and one of the two kids was killed. And I didn't want to drive drunk and kill anybody. So I started drinking at home, and alcohol just became my prison, and it's a depressant. And I got more suicidal thoughts and I got more depression, and I stayed home. And so, I went to meetings, but I wasn't drinking. I read the big book. I got one at my first meeting. They said, read the big book when you go home. And I read the book in about a day or two because I'm a fast reader. I might not remember what I read, but I read it. And there's parts I identified with. The doctor's opinion, right? Once I put that first drink in my body, I have no control over how much I'm going to drink and what's going to happen and what I'm going to do. The story, it might have been worse. It talks about I didn't have to go to jail or get a DUI or lose jobs. It says not far how far I'd gone, but where I was headed. I wasn't headed in a good place. And so I told somebody I read that book, and the guy with the whiskey and the milk, I identified with that too. So I found myself in a lot of places in our Alcoholics Anonymous book. So I was doing the meetings. I was going to, nobody told me 90 meetings in 90 days. I went to a couple after work every day for a couple of weeks. And when I got my first sponsor, I was maybe 4 or 5 weeks sober, and she had me go to a meeting before work and a couple after work. And I'll tell you more about her, but I was doing 3 meetings a day at least. And our group sold cassette tapes, and I wasn't spending money on alcohol. So I bought cassette tapes. And so if I had, had an hour drive to work each way, so I'd listen to the big book or 12 and 12 or a step study or something, a speaker. So I really put a lot of effort into my sobriety early on, which gave me a really good foundation. But at 2 weeks, I wanted to drink because, see, I wasn't putting alcohol in my body, and I had all these feelings, and what do I do with them? I was at a meeting and I started crying. And what happened to lead up to that is right before the meeting, I went out to dinner with one of the girls sober about as long as me. We were talking about our childhoods and things that shouldn't happen to little kids and things that happened when we drank. And I'm sitting in that meeting after dinner and I started crying because what happened is feelings hit, the shame hit, all those, things that happened to me. So I left the meeting because I didn't want to disrupt it. And I'm walking down the hall to go out the front door. And when I passed by where the kitchen is, a guy named John stopped me and he asked me where I was going. And I said, I'm going to go drink. I don't like feeling like this. See, all I was doing is going to meetings. I wasn't putting anything, I wasn't changing anything. I wasn't applying the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I was kind of like a dry drunk, and it wasn't fun. And what John told me is he had 2.5 years, he drank again. He just got back. It's not better out there. He said, go back in that meeting and after talk to the women. Because he said, it's not a revolving door. And if I go back out and drink, I might not make it back. And if I did make it back, it might not be right away. And if I go out, I might drive drunk and kill somebody or go to jail. So he said, go back in that meeting. He didn't give me an option. And so I did. I went in that meeting, and after the meeting, the women said, "What's going on?" And I told them. I told them what happened to me. I told them what I did. And you know what? Nobody ever said, "Carol, work the steps in order." Even when I got a sponsor, they got me through it quick. You know, our book, AA, was 4 years old when the Alcoholics Anonymous book was written. They didn't have a book of instructions. If you read Alcoholics #3, you'll read it. It says that Bill and Bob and a guy we know now was named Eddie. They went and talked to this guy named Bill D. And for about an hour. And the next day they went and did it for another hour. And then the third day they did a third step prayer with him. And that's pretty much been my experience. So I talked to those women and I told them, and you know what? They didn't say, "Why did you do that?" or "Oh, poor thing." Or they said, "Yeah, we did those things. And yeah, those things happened to us too." And they talked about how, you know, that in our book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it says, "Cling to the thought that in this higher power's hands, those deep, dark secrets of my past, they're my greatest possession to avert death and misery for others like those women are doing for me." See, I would sit in the meeting and we don't, you know, they are online meetings, but we don't see things that we see at some of the in-person meetings. Like we don't see the steps and the traditions. And there's something called slogans, which we do not hear very much about. And there's signs on the walls that says like, "Easy does it, let go and let God." Think, think, think. And the sign's usually upside down. And because my thinking was upside down when I got here. And, you know, I saw the ninth step promise on the wall that said, "Not to, I won't regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it." And I wanted that. And, you know, I didn't know I was doing a fifth step with those ladies at 2 weeks without a drink. I didn't write a fourth step out at that point. I just had to get rid of why I wanted a drink. And there's something that's called fifth step promises. Every step in the big book has promises. I like the fifth and 10th step promises too. The fifth step promise says, "If I don't do a fifth step, I'll probably drink." But another fifth step promise says, "I'll be alone at peace and ease. I'll feel the nearest of crater, and the thought to drink won't come often." And that was my experience, you know? So I was going to meetings. For my first meeting, I got into service work. I didn't know I'm doing 12-step work, but I was doing it without knowing I was doing it. They said, "Go make coffee." I said, "But I don't drink coffee. I don't know how to make coffee." To this day, I don't drink coffee and I don't know how to make. I was at the area assembly. They were giving out Cuban coffee little things. I don't drink coffee. They said, "Next to the coffee pot on the wall are instructions on how to make coffee. And if I follow the instructions, I can make coffee. And it would even taste good and y'all would drink it." You know, they told me, "Look for women more scared than me and go up to those women, give them my phone number and get theirs." And I used to carry a pad of paper and a pen around, you know, and we say our whole name. This is being recorded, so I didn't say my last name because I don't know where it's going to be. And I uphold traditions the best I can. And so, you know, some of us remember having checkbooks, remember those with deposit slips, and we would rip the deposit slip in half and we'd give somebody, I only could give it to women. I gave women my name and number. I gave my full name because, you know, if you go to the hospital and you want to go visit somebody and you say, "I want to go visit Joe." "Joe who?" "I don't know. His name's Joe. He's in here somewhere." They can't find him. Or you couldn't find Carol L in a phone book. We had paper phone books back then, right? We didn't have cell phones. We did have online meetings since 1986. They didn't just happen with COVID. But what they were is we'd log into a chat room through AOL or Yahoo or some other platform, and we would just type lines of text. So imagine there's 40 people here? Imagine one of you brought up a topic and we're all writing back to you in lines of text. That was our meeting online. So I kept going to meetings. I made coffee. I looked for women more scared than me. They told me to make phone calls to the women. I didn't like women when I got here. I didn't even like being a girl. I was a tomboy. I had to learn how to do all that stuff you taught me, right? The women told me how to act and how to dress and to clean up my mouth, you know, that love in God expresses itself through me, and are my words, actions, and deeds reflecting that? Don't use trashy talk. Act appropriately. When I share my story, I respect Alcoholics Anonymous. They told us we dress up for that, to share our story. And so I've done all that. And so I was going to meetings, and I was maybe almost a month sober. I had a lady I was talking to, a couple of ladies at the group I would talk to. I'm not sure I called them a sponsor, but I was talking to them, and they were giving me some direction. And then I was at a meeting one day at the Glass House, and they said, there's a lady that's homebound, and she really would like a meeting to her house. And so I got her number and I called her. See, this higher power, you know, I got to you and I thought I had a hateful, punishing God. My only prayer I knew when I got to you was, God, please get me out of this. Not even please, just get me out of this. I won't do it again. I promise I won't do it again. And I'd always do whatever it is again. And I'd feel bad and thought God was punishing me, you know? And so that's how I had that higher power. But it started showing up, and, you know, I can sometimes now see it, how God's working in my life before when it's happening. But in early sobriety, it was looking back, like that guy, John, stopping me from drinking, going out and drinking, right? That higher power put him there at that moment. That God put that person that shared, and I was at that meeting that said Lois needs a meeting to her house. I got her number and I called her. She had been a smoker. She had emphysema. She got sober in June 1966. She was 22 years sober. She had a third of a lung and was on oxygen, confined to bed the last 7 years of her life. She couldn't even get out of bed. She couldn't hardly sit up. She was very frail. But she became my first sponsor. And I talked to her, and, you know, God didn't say, God, Carol, I'm going to put this really neat lady in your life, but she's going to die in about 11 months. Because she died right after I had a year and right before she had 23 years. And thankfully, I didn't know that was going to happen. I knew she was frail, but I didn't know we'd have that little time. I wished I had her more, but you know what? The foundation she gave me in Alcoholics Anonymous is what I still do today. She gave me a really strong foundation. She got me into the big book right away. When I talked to her the first couple of days, I did a lot of meetings sitting on her bed or talking on the phone. A lot of times she ran out of air, so I did the talking, some of it. But we would sit on her bed and listen to cassette tapes of speakers and read the big book, and we would, you know, share what's going on in life. And if I told her something's happening, she'd say, pray about it for 3 days. 3 days? I have to pray for 3 days about this? I said, yeah. And I learned appropriate prayers, you know, like the big book has. And she told me I had to find this higher power, and I could make up anyone I wanted. My Alcoholics Anonymous book says that God's everything or nothing. What do I want it to be? I want it to be everything. You know, I used to talk to people, what's your higher power like? And people, you know, would say they invite God into their day, and that God's their best friend, and and that may be good for you. What I found for me, that didn't work for me. I don't get on my knees to pray. I've learned God doesn't care how or where I am when I pray. A lot of my prayers are laying in bed now, or walking or driving, you know. I pray, I get in the car and I say, God, if it be your will, myself into God's day. See, in God's day, anything's possible. In God's day, you know, the couple people in this meeting, I got to meet in person, you know. Today I got to go to the area assembly and see my friend from the Virgin Islands that I met online because he had his video on. And we see each other at other meetings. There's a couple people here I see at a lot of meetings. I like when people have a video on. Mine's almost always on because, see, when I go to a meeting in person, I don't put a bag over my head. If you're a black square with a name, I don't know who you are. I don't know if we're in other meetings, and we don't get to be friends. I've got really good friends I've made on online meetings. So Lois said, Carol, this is my first 3 days with Lois. I sat on her bed. Most of my meetings, not most, but a lot of them were sitting on her bed. And she said, Carol, if you weren't drinking, would you have done the things you did would you have done the things you did and put yourself in the situations? And I said, no. See, when I drank, I sacrificed morals, values, and principles. She told me things like, Carol, if you need a drink to be social, you are not a social drinker. Oh, okay. And non-alcoholics don't wonder if they're alcoholics. Okay, see, I identified with this stuff. One day I went over to my neighbor. I had about 3 months sobriety. We used to have dinner together a lot, and I told her why I wasn't doing that. And I told her I was in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, but when you have a really bad day at work, don't you just want to go home and have a drink or, drinks? And she said, no, she never thinks about it. But I did all day. I didn't drink in the morning because I might not show up at work, but I waited till I got home. So Lois had me change my action. She said, Carol, you don't think your way into right acting. If you change your actions, your thinking will change. She told me if I keep doing what I'm doing, I'll keep getting what I'm getting. So if I like what I'm getting, keep doing it. And if I don't, I can change it. And she told me everybody teaches me something. Some teach me what to do and what not to do and how to be and how not to be. And sometimes the what not to do's and how not to be's are a stronger message. So we talked about it for the first 2 days or so. And on the next day, she said, let's do a third step prayer. And we read it out of the Alcoholics Anonymous book, holding hands, sitting on her bed. And then she said, Carol, start your fourth step. I didn't want to do a fourth step. I didn't want to share that stuff. Now, when I was drinking, I would tell you some of that stuff with no problem. Right? I want you to feel sorry for me. I wanted it as an excuse of why I drank. And I didn't get to do that anymore. Told you I already did the hardest part of my fourth step at 2 weeks. I didn't know I was doing a fifth step. Didn't write a fourth step out on it. Just told those ladies. So I did. And then, I wrote my fourth step, and I tried to get out of writing a fourth step. She said, you know what, Carol, it's the best step. It was her absolute favorite step, probably other than prayer. Because she said it's not to find out if I'm good or bad. She said it's to find out why I'm the way I am. And when she got sober, she said they had the big book, the 12 and 12, and something called the Little Red Book, which is an interpretation of the big book. We didn't even have the daily reflections when I got sober. Some of you probably too, right? So we used the 24-hour-a-day book or something else. So that's what I did. She had me do it because it said, Lois was one of those very literal, like interpret the big book, like words, like what Chris shared. Because when I told my story the first time, I was almost 9 months sober. And I was scared to do it. And she had me open the book. I was sitting on her bed. She opened How It Works. And I said, okay. And she says, see this line? It says, my story discloses in a general way, our story discloses in a general way what we were like, what happened, and what we are like now. And she emphasized that the singular of we is I and not it. And so that's what I share, what I was like. What happened? What am I like now? How did I get to where I'm at now? I'm sharing that with you. I did that third step prayer. Lois gave me a formula, and I still do this, and I share it, and you can do it too. And you know what? It doesn't take me more than maybe 7 to 10 minutes. And my bedroom clock is set 10 minutes fast. And my prayer and meditation time now is a lot longer than that. But one day Lois said, are you doing step 11? And I said, I think so. And she says, are you reading it out of the big book so you know what you're praying? And so I had to do that. And so what her formula she gave me is what I still do. She told me in the morning and at night and sometime in the middle of the day, do a third step prayer. They make it really easy. The third step prayer is on page 63 in our Alcoholics Anonymous book. Told me to do a 7-step prayer. That's on page 76. It's really easy to remember too. And I used to read them out of the book, but I've changed them a little. See, I've taken words out of my vocabulary: good, bad, right, wrong, always, never, and should. I don't should on myself because then it makes me feel shame, right? Things that I thought were good or bad don't always turn out that way. I had cancer. I've lost people that I loved. you know what? It got me closer to God. When I got sober, the people ahead of me, they said, you know, life happens and challenges happen, and it makes them work their program harder and get closer to their higher power. And that's been my experience. I was 4 years sober, my cancer came back. I had major surgery, but God gave me a footprint story through it that's still unfolding. So, you know, and I'm missing 7 internal body parts. I deal with chronic pain from all the surgery, and I wouldn't change it. If God says, Carol, I'll put you back the way you were, but I lose those lessons and experiences, and so does everybody else, I'd tell God no. So I changed my 7-step prayer. Is God, take all of me and give me back what you want me to have today. And part of the 3rd step, how can I be of service to you and help other people? And it's not just in Alcoholics Anonymous, it might be at the grocery store. I have to ask people for help. That was really hard, saying I need help because I thought I owed you. And one day I said, Lois, somebody wanted to help me and I don't let them because I feel like I owe them. And then she said things so simple. Carol, what does it feel like to do for other people? I said, it feels really good. She goes, if I don't let other people help me, I'm depriving them of that. Maybe that's God answering their prayer. Help me a lot, you know. So then I had to do that. And then she had me read 68 to 71 in the Alcoholics Anonymous book and ask this higher power to help me set my ideals in every area of my life. She said, if I know how I want to live and the kind of person I want to be, if I have to take action and make decisions, are they in accordance with that? One time something happened and I didn't want to tell my boss something because I thought he'd yell, scream, and fire me. And I told her, and she said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'll tell him a lie. And I'll get this company that had to send him a bill to change their invoice. And she said, Carol, is that honest? And I said, no. And then she said, is it worth drinking over to not be honest? Because one of your ideals is to be honest. And I said, no. So I had to do all these things. And then she had me also read 84 to 88, and it's 3 times a day minimum. Step 10 and 11. Continue to watch for these things: selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. I don't get into those often, but I get into procrastinate, undecided, overwhelmed, frustrated, and a bunch of other stuff, and I can ask God to remove anything. And the solution to everything for me is in my book of Alcoholics Anonymous in every step. It's give it to this higher power, get out of me and help somebody else so God can work in my stuff. And that seems to work, you know, and I shared, you know, God, I can't think of God as a father or a friend because, see, my parents lied to me. They didn't always do what they said. Friends are human. Lois taught me don't put people on pedestal and they're not always going to be there for me. And I didn't want a higher power like that. So my higher power is gender neutral, has lots of attributes. Sometimes I need like comfort and I'd wrap God around me like a blanket, or I'd have to face something hard and God's a plexiglass old phone booth. Remember those with the 4 sides and the door? And I'll be in that and God, nothing can hurt me. My higher power is so powerful. You know, we've had a lot of rain. It'll be sunny and then it gets cloudy and then it rains and then the sun comes out when it's raining and then the sun comes out, the rain stops and it gets dark. My higher power can do that. My God isn't a he. It's just gender neutral. It can create rainbows. I mean, just really cool stuff. I don't question things anymore. I just say, okay, God, because I can say the word God now without gagging. I say, okay, God, however this goes, I get a lesson and an experience to grow through to share with somebody else someday, because that's what it's about. See, I ask God for strength. God gives me these difficulties to overcome, and they make me stronger. And in our big book, in the story, Building a New Life, on page 485, it says, pushed by my sponsor, I got into service work right away, and I really enjoyed it. She got me into service work right away. There have been some hard times too during these years of sobriety. And then it says, what I've learned is it doesn't matter what hardships and losses I've endured in sobriety. I've not had to go back to drinking. Here's a condition: as long as I work the program, keep being of service, go to meetings, keep my spiritual life together, I can live a decent life. I live more than a decent life. I do a lot of service. The other thing Lois had me do when I was new is she said, write to GSO, say you want to be of service. I did. I did what she told me. I didn't always question it. Once in a while, I delayed doing it. And then I realized if I listened to her, I saved me a lot of grief, you know. There's a line in the big book. It says, by living alone, I eliminate a lot of grief, but I also eliminate a lot of joy. And there's another one that says, when I was drinking, I was withdrawing from life little by little, and now I get in the social life of the world. And another one says, I'm in the world to play the role that this higher power assigns. And just to the extent that I humbly do that, I can match calamity and serenity. And that's been my experience. So I got involved and I wrote to women in prison, which makes me really grateful. And I do this. It's called Loners International. It's like an AA pen pal club. I've done it for my whole sobriety, pretty much. Write letters to people. We help each other stay sober, and it's helped me a whole lot. And if you like to write letters, and there's people in remote parts of the world. There's somebody in this new newsletter, and he's in Slovenia. He gets to one meeting a year. He has no email or phone, and he stays sober by letters. And they don't all have postal service like we have. Sometimes they'll get a letter once a month or so, not regular mail. Makes me really grateful. So Lois got me into doing that. We did the 3rd step prayer. Then she had me start my 4th step. And one day I didn't want to go to my home group because they were going to talk about the 4th step. So I went to a different group because I thought maybe, I'll go to a different group. They did the 4th step that night. So I learned if God wants something to happen in my life, I can't outsmart God. So I wrote my 4th step out. We kind of did it like the little red book because it says in a general way. So I did some of it like the big book with the columns, but then after we did that, she had me write a page, and it was like intolerance, fear, resentment, anger, impatience, and whatever the other categories are in there. And then she had me write in a general way why I was each of those. And I got to see the pattern. I'm intolerant, I'm impatient, I get resentful, I get all these, because you're not doing what I think you should do and how I think you should do it, and you're not treating me right. And I saw the pattern. And then we started laughing about how silly that was. And I thought, and how when stuff happened to me as a little kid, how I let that affect my life. Or when I drank and I was in my 20s, how I let those things happen. But not only did they happen, some of them I had no control over, but how I let it affect me. And I did the 5th step, and we did the hardest stuff first. And then and I had no more secrets. And I would go to meetings, a lot of meetings, and I'd hear people telling my secrets from the podium, sharing, and I'd talk to them and go, that happened to me too. And yeah, I did that too. And sometimes God reveals things like an onion, layer by layer, gradually. And sometimes God just, if you ever husk an ear of corn and you just go right down to the kernels, sometimes that happens to me too. And so I shared that stuff, and then I had this no more secrets. And so my prayer at that time was, God, I have an empty spot. Please fill it like you want it filled. And it always got filled with service and women. That was what it got filled with. And then I was still doing those prayers. The other thing she had me do besides all those readings is I had to write a gratitude list every day. If I whined about anything, Lois would say, Carol, stand up, take 2 steps, say, thank you, God. You can walk, talk, and breathe at the same time, because she couldn't do that. Couldn't stay in self-pity. And so she gave me prayers, a lot of prayers. God, if it be your will, can I please not do things to hurt myself anymore? God, if it be your will, can I see this person or situation as you do? She told me I had to take care of myself for God so I could do what God wanted me to do. And then if somebody said something and she said, Carol, would you let somebody dump a bucket of garbage in the middle of your living room? And I said, well, no. And she said, why would you let them dump it in your mind? She said, go to the mirror, say, this is what they said about you. Is it true or not? If it's not true, let it go. If it is true, do I like that about me, or do I want to change it? My family never got into recovery, and sometimes they didn't they couldn't push my buttons, and I wouldn't react to them like I used to. I didn't get into arguments. I didn't have to prove my mother wrong. Lois said, we had telephones that we could put notes on. Some of us remember those. So my notes were, she can be wrong. I don't have to be right. Oh, I don't have to prove somebody wrong, right? And so I would do these simple things. and they seem to work. And so I had to do all this. The other thing she had me do besides a gratitude list is I didn't have self-esteem and self-respect and dignity when I got here. So she had me write a list of things I did every day to help my self-esteem. I didn't know what it was. I had to look up the word in the dictionary. So it might be called somebody, went to a meeting, ate a sandwich because I didn't want to eat, and just different things, you know. And then I had to write a journal and talk to people and do the steps. And so I still do that. And, you know, when I read my big book, when I was, I don't know, just a few months sober, in one of the meetings at my home group, I'll let, you know, we read ABC after the ABCs and how it works, we stop. I don't know how many of you have read after that, but I know I do. But this lady read it in the first person singular. And it had such a powerful impact from that day forward. I read my big book out loud in the singular first person. Because when I read silently, I don't remember what I read. But when I read it out loud, I remember it more. My mind slows down. They told me it's a textbook, not a novel, so I can highlight and make notes and all kinds of stuff in my book. And my books fall apart because they get used a lot. But after the ABCs, it says, being convinced, I'm at step 3. I decided to turn my will and my life over to God as I understood God. What do I mean and what do I do? First requirement is that I be convinced any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Boy, I did. That's what got me to you. On that basis, I am almost always in collision with somebody. And it says, I am like the actor. I want to run the whole show, and I'm trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery my way. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but it says, if everybody do as I wish, the show would be great, and everything, I'd be happy, and I might be virtuous and kind, and if you don't do what I want, I may be mean, egotistical, selfish. Very powerful, helped me a lot. Somebody I used to sponsor was here. She knows I gave that assignment a lot to people. I still do it today because it reminds me of how I am. So we did that. I did my 5th step. I do 6 and 7, ask God to remove whatever's blocking me. I had to make amends. Some were financial amends. I had credit card debt. And so what I did is I went to the bank, I got a loan, I paid off credit cards and didn't use them anymore. Or if I did, I gave a low limit that I knew I could take care of, and I only had to pay the bank, and it was a lower interest. I wrote letters, I left people alone, I did all the amends. I don't have enough time to go through all of them, but I get into service a lot. I do a lot of that. I had to make amends to myself by eating right and sleeping. And Lois would say, like, Carol, what happens if you run your car 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and you don't check the oil and the tire? I said, it'll break down. And she said, that's what my body will do. They gave me things like, they told me, and you can do this. It's real simple. They told me to clasp my hands. So I did. They said, what thumb's in the front? I said, my right one. They said, switch it so my left thumb's in the front. I said, how does that feel? I said, it feels weird and uncomfortable and I don't like it. And they said, every day clasp my hands, and every time my right thumb's in the front, switch it so my left thumb is in the front. And one day when I clasp my hands, it's going to be automatic and comfortable. And that's what happens. That's the new actions and new behaviors in Alcoholics Anonymous. At first, it was weird and uncomfortable and I didn't like it. But the more I did it, the more automatic it became. Little things like every time I make a phone call, say, God, please let this go the way you want. Maybe somebody wouldn't answer, right? Or how I apply step 10 every day. When I have to call like a company, some of you may be like me and we get transferred a bunch and I have to explain it many times to somebody and I start getting frustrated and I get to say, you know what, I'm not upset with you. I'm just frustrated with your company. And I don't have to try to find that person to make an amend because I was nasty to them. There's so many stories. I never know what God's going to have me share. I'd never plan. But I thought of this the other day and I hadn't in a while. And it's about, you know, it talks in our big book, have I built a sound foundation? You know, after I do that 5th step, it says sit for an hour. Did I omit something? Did I build a strong foundation? I think I built a strong foundation because I haven't even thought about drinking. But I know alcohol's that subtle foe. I know I have a powerful higher power. I don't have time to tell you the stories, but I was about 8 months sober and I wanted a kiss from a guy for Valentine's Day. And I told Lois and my other friend who she went back out at 7 years, never saw her again. But Lois said, pray about it. I will tell you, I don't have time to tell you the whole story. My kiss was from Willie Nelson, the singer. Wouldn't have thought it. God thinks bigger than me, right? I have so many God stories. Another one, I worked for cities for most of my career. And in Texas, I worked for the city and we put out a bid for a fire. We were building a new fire station. We put out a bid and the bids came in pretty high. And so the city commission, they decided to rebid the project. And we had to rebid it 2 more times and they took the lowest bid to save money. But what happened is that company, in order to save all the costs, they skimped on materials. They poured the slab for the fire station. It didn't have the proper proportion of whatever you put in concrete. And as it cured, it had cracks in it. And we could not build the fire station. We had to have a lawsuit, and that took a few years. I tried to, Lois says we worked through this program when I was new. She made sure I didn't have cracks in my foundation. She would say, did you leave anything out at your 5th step for a couple of weeks to see if I did? We did a solid program. She got me through it right away. I was finishing my amends, the last that I knew. And I'm telling you, I was doing service 10, 11, and 12 the whole time I was sober from my first meeting. But the amends I finished by the end, most of them that I could do were finished within my first 4 months of sobriety. I try to live this program. It's not something that I do once in a while. It's a way of life. Alcoholics Anonymous, it's in our literature. This is a way of life. And I don't do it perfect. I don't want you to think I do. And some days I'm kicking and screaming going through it, but I do it. And not every day is good. Lois told me, pits have cherries and thorns have roses. And if I need the opposites to have a joy, I need the pain, about 2.5 months ago, I had a 100.4 temperature and my throat hurt so bad I couldn't swallow. And a couple of days later, I went to the doctor and he said, I have a virus. It's going to take time. And I've been dealing with laryngitis for 2.5 months. I had to stop speaking for a little while because I couldn't talk. And I don't take swallowing for granted now. I've got a lot of health issues and it hurts to walk some days. Got different sneakers, but I don't take walking for granted either. All my sponsors that I've had, except for 1 or 2 that were short term, got sober in 1950s and 60s. They keep it simple. The sponsor I've now got sober at 18 in 1965. She is 3 years older than me and she has 23 years longer sober. She just celebrated 60 years in June. When I was 7 years sober, I've been to 5 international conventions, starting when I was 2 years sober, and I got to share on Loners International at that conference. I was 7 years sober at the San Diego International, and Saturday night during the sobriety countdown, when everybody's standing, this lady sat down. It seemed like forever. And I said, excuse me, ma'am, when did you get sober? Because she was one of the last people standing. And she said, April 30th, 1950. And she became my sponsor till she passed away, the end of 2004, with 54.5 years of sobriety. And I got to go to San Diego and see her get her 50-year medallion. You've given me a life. Alcoholics Anonymous has given me a life beyond what I could have imagined. And it's not the physical stuff, tangible, material stuff. It's the internal stuff. No matter what I go through, I can live peacefully. I've had a lot of stuff through, about 2 months ago, my phone crashed, couldn't get anybody to get it to turn on. I lost every text message, all my WhatsApp messages, all my links, recording, picture, everything. and it didn't even upset me. And what it did is I got in touch with a lot of people and said, if I sent you anything, can you send it back? I took a commitment for 3 months to get a speaker for a meeting every single night. And it was a pleasure because I got to talk to people I haven't talked to in a while, or maybe somebody I heard share and I really wanted them to come and share their experience at this meeting. It's at 7:30 every night Eastern time. I'll put my number in the chat. I took it off because of bombers, but I'll put it in the chat when it's open. Anybody can contact me. I have lots of information and meetings and recordings and all kinds of stuff. And you know what? When I get into a problem or something happens, my first thought isn't, I need to get to a meeting. Meetings don't keep me sober. My meeting is one-on-one. I call my sponsor, call somebody in my support group after I prayed and maybe tried to read something out of my big book. That's what keeps me sober. The program of Alcoholics Anonymous and the steps, traditions, and concepts. And Chris brought up, they're not a Zoom meeting. Tradition 4 and 6 is don't endorse an outside entity. Zoom is just one of several platforms that lets me have my either open or closed online AA meeting. Right? My meeting right now is at a city building. I'm not at a city meeting, I'm at an AA meeting. So I'm very grateful. There's lots of ways to be of service, and I'm so grateful to have this way to live. The end of 2012, well, in 2010, I had 4 more operations and they caused more havoc in my body. The end of 2012, we found more tumors and my doctor says I won't live a year. What I did is instead of sitting quietly with God, I sold my condo. I gave everything away except clothes, made my funeral arrangements, living in my old 1998 Dodge camper van. God gave me an apartment to rent, which is a long God story. And I'm still here all these years later. When I was new, the group I went to in the morning had signs by the coffee pot. One said, live each day as if it's your last, because one of these days you're going to be right. And another one said, is today the worst day of your life? They quit looking like it is. So I am so grateful to have this way to live, that I can be at peace no matter what's happening. And I have a book of instructions called Alcoholics Anonymous, and I have the steps, traditions, and concepts that guide my life. They give me a balanced program in life. So I know I went a couple minutes over, but thank you so much for having me here.